Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Power Hungry Podcast. I'm Robert Bryce. On this podcast, we talk about energy, power, innovation, and politics. And we're in London for a special episode of the Power Hungry Podcast. And I'm pleased to welcome my guest, George Yates, my friend and guest, George Yates. He is the CEO of Heyco Energy Group, a Dallas-based oil and gas company. George, welcome to the Power Hungry Podcast.
Thank you, Robert. Great to be with you.
Now, I warned you, I don't warn all of my guests, but guests on this podcast introduce themselves. So if you don't mind, imagine you've arrived at a dinner party or somewhere and you don't know anyone, and you have 60 seconds to tell them who you are. Please introduce yourself.
I'm a third generation independent oil and gas operator. My grandfather got the family in the business in the 1920s. So a long history. Built with my family a business in southeast New Mexico and what we call the Delaware Basin. We've done a lot of things over time, interesting things. One thing we got involved with 25 years ago was international exploration and development. So we were exposed to the geology of Europe. We built on that. The recent developments in our company, so we're based in the U.S. We have U.S. Production in a few plays, but we operate in Europe, which is sort of an interesting reversal of how most companies might operate.
So if you don't mind, just to interrupt, so you own interests in production in the U.S., but you're not drilling in the U.S.?
Well, in the U.S., we're not operating.
Okay.
We are non-operators.
So you have interest in wells, but you're not the controlling interest.
That's right.
So then you're not the ones determining where you drill and how you drill or the depths or any of those things.
We have pretty large interest in some of the non-operators.
So you have a say. You have a say in how it's done.
Absolutely.
But the difference between the non-operated, and it's something I kind of know this, but I don't fully understand it. So you're non-operator in the U.S. in most of your operations, but in Europe you're the operator, which means that is it the difference? Then we're going to drill here and now. Is that explain that difference? If you will.
That's right. An operator does the major planning for development, for drilling, provides the staff and resources to get that done.
So the geologists, the accountants, the engineers,
exactly right.
The roughnecks, or they decide which contractor they'll hire to do the drilling and the completions, and
that's what we do.
Okay.
And we have an office in Madrid. We acquired a gas field in northern Spain last year, mid-year last year, and so we operate that. We operate production. We are.
And are you drilling in Spain now?
We will be. We will be in the first quarter of next year. We have 2 to 3 wells to drill in a field, development wells. We're really pleased with that acquisition. We also have a big unconventional play. We can talk about unconventionals a little later. In Spain that could really make a difference to Spain and to Europe. And in the UK, we acquired that part of AIM-listed public company that we did not own and took it private. So it is now effectively a subsidiary. But it is Egdon Resources. And
spell it for me again. What is the name again?
EGDON.
EGDON,
Egdon Resources.
And so it was a publicly traded company on the London Exchange?
No, on the AIM Exchange.
Okay.
And we were really pleased with that acquisition for a couple of reasons. We love the staff. We have great human resources that fit in very well with the human resources we have over in Madrid.
And what is that head count, if you don't mind me asking? What's your footprint? How many employees now do you have in Europe?
20, probably.
I mean, and
in
compare that to
range.
your office in Dallas. How many do you have in Dallas?
Well, our total headcount is about 28 or 29.
So you have
so
almost as many people in
We
Europe
have
as
more.
you do.
We actually have more people in Europe
Oh,
than
you
in
do?
the U.S.
Okay.
But part of that is because we operate a gas plant in
Oh,
Europe
okay.
that involves more people.
So then that's a gas processing plant.
That's a gas processing plant.
Right. So well, just a quick aside. So gas processing means you're pulling out the liquids, whether it's propane, butane, or something else, so that you can put it into a pipeline. Or if there's other contaminants, CO2, nitrogen, you're
exactly right.
You're
Yeah.
stripping out, or in the worst case, sour gas, hydrogen sulfide. So
Right.
that processing is the refining part of the natural gas business that a lot of people don't know about. Just to
Yep. Yep.
get people to hip them up to the lingo here. So
Yep, that's
so
right.
you have a gas plant, but so that's in addition to the technical or office staff. You have then engineers.
We have operations
Right.
at our gas plant.
And about how many people would that be?
Probably 8
Oh, okay.
people
Okay.
to operate the,
Fairly
the
small.
gas plant.
Yeah, okay.
Fairly small.
Gotcha.
We believe in a lean operation, I'm much more comfortable.
Yeah.
I am an independent.
Right. Sure.
And the beauty of what we do, Robert, is that for me, is that I get to work around a fairly small number of really bright people.
Right.
And so we have great technical capabilities, and we operate to finish in the UK. In the UK, with our acquisition of Egdon,
Right.
we add to our pipeline of conventional projects, which we're really excited about. These are projects that don't require a change of law, don't require government change of policy.
Right.
And we are pleased with the acquisition. The public markets have really punished small oil and gas producers. It's
Right.
no place to be. And so bargains can be had, but also the operation will be much more effective and efficient as a private.
And so, what was the total cost on that acquisition of Egdon then?
We owned about 45% of it. We acquired what we didn't own and converted to U.S. dollars was about 17.
$17 million. And that was. And when did that close, George?
We closed it in I think it was July, but finally we're able to have a court hearing in September.
Okay.
So the court hearing took it private.
I see.
Took it
Okay.
off the public exchange. When you
I got you.
have a public company, there are all kinds of
issues,
and
hoops
that's
that
another
gotta,
reason
right.
why we wanted to take the company
Right.
company private. But what Egdon also has is a very large footprint in the Bowland Shale, in the Gainesboro Trough, which is our favored basin in the Bowland, in the Midlands, in the UK. So so we have a combination of conventional production and development, as I say, in our pipeline.
Right.
But we also have the unconventionals
Right.
that we've been working on for some time, and naturally are more speculative because we don't have government permission to
Sure.
or regulatory
Right.
environment to go ahead and develop those. But they're very needed.
Right.
That's the message. They're
So
very needed.
explain then, since this given where we are, and the Bowland Shale and the what trough was it again? The Gainesboro
Gainesboro
Trough.
Gainesboro
Okay.
Trough.
So that you believe that's the sweet spot of the shale deposit in the UK in the Bowland Shale anyway.
Well, the reason we like it is because we tested it with a well operated by iGas in March of 2019. Before the moratorium, of course, was
Before
put
the
in place.
moratorium on hydraulic fracturing.
On hydraulic fracturing.
So we'll come back to the ban and then the abandonment of the ban and the reinstatement of the ban under Sunak, but we'll come back to that. But go ahead. So the test in 2019, what did you find?
We found beautiful shale rock, friable, all the ingredients that you're
I'm sorry,
looking.
friable. What does that mean?
Brittle. You can frack it. Not
Okay.
too much clay.
Oh, okay.
For instance, gas, very, very gas prone, although with some liquids. We had a very solid 1,400 feet of black shale with 700 feet of sand, all of which was sourced. And the black shale alone, our Weatherford, who did the technical work for the group, gave it more gas in place than per square mile than any of the headline plays in the United States. So a very large target.
So I want you to repeat that, and we've chatted offline and over the last few years about this. So you're saying that the test that you've done, and from what you're telling me, this area is pretty much unexplored in terms of unconventional production. And to be clear, unconventional involves extended reach, long horizontal segments of wells that are hydraulically fractured with high pressure water and sand and a little surfactant to release oil and gas from those shale sources. And you mentioned source rock and the shale, and that's the difference between unconventional and conventional, if I'm not mistaken, is that you're actually targeting the source rock, which would later turn into a conventional deposit, which we've been tapping for more than a century. So, but just to be clear, and I'll stop talking here in half an hour or so.
I told you I was going to interview you.
There's more gas in place per square mile in the Gainesboro Trough as part of the Bowling Shale than in the Marcellus, than in the Haynesville, than in the shales that are known in the Permian Basin. This could be one of the great untapped shale gas and oil resources on the planet, and yet no one's talking about it. Am I missing something?
You're on target, Robert.
Okay.
The only thing that I'd pull you back on a little bit,
please,
is we're working on the basis of information from one well.
Right.
So we
need to delineate it.
We need to drill more, of course. But what we have is in an unconventional resource, you want the right kind of rock.
Right.
You can complete. You want a lot of in-place reserve. So you've got something to work with.
Right.
And so the Gainesboro Trough has that. It's very exciting. The Royal Geologic Society has done studies of the Bowling, and they put huge amounts of oil and gas in the Bowling. And
can you tell me what those? You have those numbers?
No, not offhand.
They're big, though, right?
But they're very big.
Royal Geologic Survey.
We sort of had our doubts about it, and we were a little skeptical. But with the Springs Road 1 well, the well in the Gainesboro Trough, we're sort of leaning that way. The resource is very, very large. It's a target. It's also very gas prone. Although it will have some liquids in it. And the other thing about the Gainesboro Trough, which is probably important, if you followed the history of development in the Bowling, the development in the Bowling started in the Bowling Basin to the west, and the Gainesboro is to the east. And the operator, unfortunately, appeared to have moved a fault after fracking. At least there was a fairly minor seismic event which got people frightened, and the government shut down the drilling, and I think clearly overreacted. But we've spent a lot of time and man hours gaining expertise on the relationship between hydraulic fracking and fault movement, particularly the kind of fault movement that you can feel on the surface. And so we're pretty confident in the results of this. In fact, we even had a couple of really smart geophysicist scientists at the University of Bristol do a study for us. And the Gainesboro Trough, the Boland Basin, is highly faulted and fractured. It's got a geologic history with lots of tectonics going on. Gainesboro Trough, by comparison, is very quiet, and so the probability of, I think in the report, if I can paraphrase, there's an order of magnitude less probability of a seismic event that could be felt on the surface in the Gainesboro Trough. So the Gainesboro has a lot going on for it.
So that seismicity potential, I guess, would be a way to think about it. In Gainesboro Trough is far less than in the Boland Shale.
Yes. Than the Boland Basin.
Boland Basin, okay.
Than any basin that's highly faulted,
fractured.
Yeah.
So I have to ask you, you're talking about this, George, because you have such a long history in oil and gas, and family does. Why not just play in the U.S. sandbox? I mean, you've got all these, I interviewed George Kaiser briefly one time, and he said, and he was well known among a lot of people as being very good at risk analysis. And he said, well, you have to know where your risks are, right? Where are they concentrated? And if you understand that, then you can understand how to move forward. But you are going from Texas or New Mexico, where the regulatory issues, the geology, and there's less, and where I'm, from where I'm sitting, right, there's a lot less risk. And coming into Europe, where you're jumping into a regulatory thicket, where you've got what do they call them, a lot of above ground risk and a fair amount of below the ground risk, right? Because it hasn't been drilled that much. You don't know. You've got to still typify the deposit. So why go to Europe? I mean, why wouldn't you just stay home? I mean, I'm just curious. I mean, is it just because the opportunity is the potential for a home run is so much larger?
Well, if I had a great crystal ball, for half of my career, we've had investment bankers drop by my office and say, the Permian is dead. It's time for you to get out, just like everybody else is. So,
and
Robert,
they've been wrong, and they've been wrong, and they've been wrong some more. And the Permian is still the hottest play in the world.
So what we chose to do with now one thing that we did that might be notable back in the 1980s, and I've always been blessed with a wonderful staff, capable staff, and we drilled a great discovery in the Bone Springs.
And the Bone Springs is part of the Permian Basin.
Yeah, it's part of the Delaware, right at the shelf.
Oh, okay. So I think the Delaware Basin is part of the Permian, that area. Anyway,
well, the Bone Springs today is the Bone Springs and the Wolfcamp are the top targets for horizontal drilling in the Delaware Basin. Delaware Basin's the hottest place in the world for unconventional development.
And it's contiguous, or do you consider that part of the Permian?
Delaware definitely is the western side of
western side, so closer to the New Mexico border from Texas.
It's about a third to a half of it is in Texas, and the other half is in New Mexico, southeast New Mexico.
Right. A lot of it on federal land then.
A lot on public land, which people don't realize.
Right, yeah.
As they say, shale will never work in Europe because it's all public land. And I have to remind people that some of the best early plays in unconventional development were on public land,
right?
Jonah Field, for
instance. So I interrupted you on the Bone Spring because I just wanted to clarify, because I kind of know some of these things, but I always have to check. Okay, well, do I really understand? So you said you drilled in the '80s a successful well in the Bone Spring.
Well, we discovered a field.
And
but it was a good carbonate field. It was a conventional reservoir with lots of permeability, but we knew that we had to drill a lot of wells to find similar fields. We looked for a bailout, and we came up with the Bone Spring sand. Second Bone Spring sand is a possible bailout. And as far as I know, we experimented with it, we fracked it, we experimented with the frack. We kept going and completed, as far as I know, the first commercial well in the Bone Springs in the vertical world. It was unconventional. We didn't know the term unconventional, but it was unconventional. So we built a spread. We built a lot of resources, and then in 2000 we had to decide whether to get big or do let somebody else do the development for us. And so we got together, merged our operated assets in the Delaware with Matador Resources. And so we became a large shareholder of Matador, and we still have a substantial position.
And Matador is now one of the biggest independent players in the Permian Basin.
They're a wonderful company,
and they're publicly traded.
Joe,
and
Fran
now likely a takeover target, given what's been going on lately.
Well,
it's possible.
I've seen their names on the list, but we've had a wonderful relationship, and so we've seen our acreage developed, and we profit from being a stockholder and doing that. So we're not out of it.
But that's always the challenge, right? For any company is the scale issue, right? Do you have enough money? Do you have enough resources? Do you have enough manpower to scale up? And so at that point, you said, well, we don't, so we're going to partner up. But now we've talked about conventional, unconventional several times, and this is the key differentiator with your holdings here in Europe, right? Some conventional, some unconventional. So I asked you to introduce yourself. I gave you 60 seconds. Now you have 60 seconds and no more to explain the difference between conventional oil and gas well and unconventional. Go.
Conventional is are reservoirs you don't have to frack.
Okay.
Reservoirs that
don't require hydraulic fracturing.
Yes, and that you can develop. The way I define it is under current regulation.
Okay.
You can develop it, and so on the risk side, we don't see very much risk in our conventional resources in Europe.
And is it fair to say, just to interrupt, because I want to be clear, the conventional well then would be a vertical well. You wouldn't have a horizontal segment of that well then. Is that fair?
That's generally true.
Okay.
If you have a highly fractured reservoir, you want to open up more rock in a well.
Yeah.
You might drill a horizontal, or it's more likely a slant.
But the key differentiator is that you're not required in a conventional well to use hydraulic fracturing. So you don't need what's called a frac spread, which are a bunch of trucks with big pumps on them, forcing enormous amounts of water, sand, and surfactant into the reservoir or into the target area to fracture the rock so you can bring more oil and gas out. So that's the key differentiator. You don't have to use that high pressure pumping. In between a conventional well and an unconventional.
And I'll go back to what you said earlier. Shale is a source rock, and in a shale play, you're essentially mining the source rock.
Right.
So one of the differences between conventional and unconventional is you've got conventional traps where the oil is migrated out of source rock, and in the case in our case where we describe conventional as not needing the kind of stimulation that shale needs. And then you've got unconventional, which is basically source rock. It's very tight. A lot of the oil and gas is still in place.
Right.
Not all of it has migrated out. And you need generally horizontal drilling and multi-stage hydraulic fracking.
Right.
For good recoveries in that rock. So that's how I define it.
Gotcha.
So
and to be clear, the reason why you have to do that high pressure pumping and extraordinarily high pressure is I get my porosities and permeabilities mixed up, but I think it's the permeability of some of these shales is roughly equal to that of what we see in concrete. Right?
Very
There's a
tight.
very hard, not necessarily hard, but very tight formations where you have to, if you want something to come out of it, you've got to fracture it to make it work.
You've got to stimulate it.
Right.
In some cases, like our unconventional play in Spain, it's naturally fractured. For maximum production, it also needs hydraulic fracking. But every well that's been drilled in this play in the last 50 years has flowed gas. So there are always exceptions. But yes, when I talk about unconventional, I'm talking about shale or rock that has to be stimulated with hydraulic fracking, and generally in Europe unaccessible to development because of
the prohibitions on hydraulic fracturing.
That's right.
Well, since we're talking about that very issue, how big of a role did Russian money play, in your view? Because this has been reported by numerous entities. Matt Ridley's reported on it. Matt Ridley's a friend of mine and very savvy and very very curious, a polymath and a remarkable character has written about this, that there are studies that have shown that in fact that Russian money was involved in organized efforts to ban hydraulic fracturing in Europe. Do you believe that?
I do believe that.
And why would the Russians do that?
Pretty obvious.
Well, walk me through it.
Let me walk you through it. Let's go back about 15 years.
Sure.
We did not operate in Europe, but we had some working interest in Europe, and everything was very pleasant. We didn't have pushback, full transparency, and if you wanted to see a well that we staked the well plan, that was quite easy, and we sent it out to environmental groups, no problem. And then suddenly militancy occurred, and I was told that suddenly some of the radical environmental groups had lots of money, and I was told the money came from Russia.
And you heard this from yourself from people that you know here in Europe,
yes,
because you were
with credibility. Because
you were drilling then at that time in Spain, or where were you operating then at those times?
Yes, we were doing some planning in Spain.
Right. For multi-well development projects, and this is now in the so the 2010s, that time frame period.
Yeah, in that time frame.
Okay.
So we've documented at least $100 million that was spent by Russia.
Right.
Funding environmental groups that were based in the United States.
In the United States.
Yes, you're talking about.
So in addition to European groups that were getting money from the Russians, but you're saying that there were that Putin and presumably Gasprom, which is the state-controlled gas company in Russia, that they were funneling that much money into NGOs in the United States?
There are two different sources. One has been documented very, very clearly. I'll point you back to work that was done 7 or 8 years ago by Lamar Smith when he was chairman of the Science and Technology Committee in the House. He conducted hearings, got bank records, and so everybody knows, who's curious, that the Russians funded these anti-fracking campaigns. They were centered in Europe, but it also occurred in the United States. We think the amount spent was double or triple that amount of money. There is a foundation that has funneled a lot of money to the anti-fracking campaigns, but there's no transparency on ownership, but it's got a lot of Russian flavor to it.
Do you recall the name of that foundation off the top of your head? It's like, was it Sea Change? Yeah, right. I think that I remember seeing that name. Yeah.
But we have a file on this, Robert. If you like to.
Well,
take a
I am
look
interested
at.
because one of the things that to me is, we were here in London at the ARC conference, and there's been a lot of talk about the, philosophy of the anti-humanists and the Malthusians and why they're opposed to energy and hydraulic fracturing and climatism and the rest of it. There's a lot of talk about the philosophy and why it is, alternative religion, etc. Well, my question, okay, well, that's all fine, but cui bono, right? Who benefits, right? Where's the money? Follow the money. Who benefits from all of this? So,
well,
I'll ask the question this way. So, were the Russians putting money into these anti-fracking efforts in the U.S. and in Europe to prevent more shale gas development, so that the U.S. and Europe would be more dependent on Russian gas?
Exactly. You hit the target. Russia wanted to put out of. He wanted to kill the baby in the crib.
Uh-huh.
Right. He did not want competition from Europe-based natural gas. We can show you. Well, the next thing that happened, the investment by Putin was very effective. People became frightened. If you had a Facebook account, you lived in Europe, you saw Gasland. Remember that film?
Yeah, sure. By what was his
Fox.
name? Josh Fox.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Gasland, which was all.
You light a faucet, boom,
it was,
and it scared people, and that was followed over a few years by 6 countries outlawing hydraulic fracking in various ways, banning or outlawing, and including some of the most prospective shale plays in Europe.
Right.
So it was a very effective campaign. The other thing that I'll point you to as we gain a little altitude here, he not only repressed competition in Europe. Europe bought into the Russian dependency and said everything's okay. We have all this Russian gas. We know what Germany did certainly, but other parts of Europe as well, and so you see the decline in domestic natural gas throughout Europe, a very, very steady decline
from 2010 on.
From 2010 on, and a remarkable increase in imports of Russian gas.
Right.
And the time came when those curves had crossed and the dependency was complete, almost complete, for the Ukraine invasion. So I see this as one piece. This was a part of a long-term strategy.
Yeah. I found the reference because I wrote about this when it was in the Hill last year, almost exactly a year ago. Well, in fact, November 2nd. 2022. I wrote about it. Here's the, not bragging about my work here, but I think it put it in context. I wrote this almost exactly a year ago after Rishi Sunak reimposed the fracking ban here in Britain. I said it's a gift of Vladimir Putin and a disaster for British consumers and industry. Remember, Putin and his cronies helped fund the anti-shale gas propaganda that led 7 European countries to ban fracking. 2014, Anders Fogh Rasmussen, then Secretary General of NATO, former Prime Minister of Denmark, said, quote, Russia, as part of their sophisticated information and disinformation operations, engaged with so-called non-governmental organizations, organized or environmental organizations working against shale gas to maintain European dependence on imported gas. 2016, the Wilfred Martens Center for European Studies in Belgium published a report that found the Russian government gave about 82 million euros to, quote, NGOs whose job is to persuade EU governments to stop shale gas exploration.
Yeah.
And in 2019, Britain imposed a ban on fracking.
Yeah.
So now here we are in 2023. Britain, well, I don't want to get too technical. Britain is screwed. Germany is screwed. They are, they're not drilling. They haven't relaxed their bans on fracking. They've reimposed them. What happened? So the ban comes in place in Britain. We'll focus on Britain since we're here in London. They imposed the ban in 2019. Liz Truss comes into power as a Tory earlier this year. She says, no, we're gonna forget this ban. We need to drill. she's in office for what, a cup of coffee, I don't know, 6 weeks or something. She goes out, and one of the first things Rishi Sunak does as an incoming Tory of Truss's own party says, oh no, we're going to keep the ban in place. What the actual hell is going on? I mean, don't they see this threat to the... Now, even if they repeal the ban on fracking, it's going to take a while, for them to ramp up. I mean, there's no doubt, right? It's going to take a while. But what the hell? These are the Tories. These are conservatives. They're supposed to be rational about this stuff. What happened here in Britain, George?
Well, I have no real explanation for it, except for the fact that the green movement has been institutionalized in governments all over Europe, to the point that some of the precepts are unquestioned, unchallenged.
The precepts of the climatism, disaster, catastrophic climate change. That mindset has been, you say, has been institutionalized. So it's become part of the ruling parties on both sides.
On both sides. I have a reason for thinking that might change, because the current policies...
Well, better, right?
It has to,
It has to,
Robert.
yeah.
It has to. So taking the UK as an example, the UK uses about 2.9, I think was last year, trillion cubic feet of
3 trillion, 3 TCF a year.
Roughly 3 TS a year. Half of that is domestic.
Right.
And about a quarter of it is imported pipeline gas, and about a quarter of it is LNG. The domestic part of that is declining very quickly.
Right.
And the
pipeline gas now is mainly from Norway, is that right?
The pipeline gas is mainly from Norway.
Right.
The Rishi Sunak, the government, is hoping to ramp up part of the North Sea.
Right.
But the most you could expect out of the North Sea is, frankly, a tired basin. You might level some of that decline rate. But in new supplies, the new supplies are going to need to come from shale. That has the potential of the largest volumes and the shortest time to be able to ramp up.
Right.
The shale. And Robert, you as we look at this, shale in the UK, shale in Spain, shale in Europe could accomplish essentially all the objectives that the Green Tories or others say is the objective with renewables, your alt energy.
Right.
That is low carbon.
Right.
We've put together a study in Spain indicating with the ramp up, with the development of our resources over there, that we just eliminate a lot of carbon, eliminate a huge amount of carbon
because you can displace coal.
Well, no, you displace pipeline gas and LNG that carries a much higher carbon footprint.
I see. So you're saying that amount of CO2 intensity of domestic production would be lower than that of importation.
Much lower. And you have thrown into that energy security,
right?
Reasonable prices for your research. There's no way you can put on the kinds of volumes that we're looking at in these plays without affecting price.
Right.
So price would be much more reasonable, and then you have all the economic benefits, the employment. We went together with Deloitte in our study in Spain, and the employment numbers were just mind-boggling.
Which is key for Europe, which has been deindustrializing for a long time.
And Robert, if they want to decarbonize their electric grid, there's a way to do it with natural gas. Technology is really coming along.
Right.
We've got the net power. alternative that could be used to decarbonize. It's perfect for the UK because of a lot of carbon capture storage options with the North Sea, but even better than that would be industries built around commercial CO2. So there is a way to have your cake and eat it. If I were a policymaker, that's what I'd like.
Right.
I would like to satisfy those voters whose primary interest was CO2, the environment.
Right.
But I've got to deliver reasonably priced
energy
and stability to
Right.
the power market. And
Right.
this can only be done, in my view, by shale reserves. I don't see anything else happening except more and more imports. It's certainly not going to be done by doubling up on windmills and renewables, because the dependency for that is pushing the UK and others into a red zone.
Right.
Dangerous.
Dependence on
territory.
Chinese supply chains.
Yes, and
Yeah.
then we're dependent upon Chinese supply chains.
Right. So I must have misread these numbers before, but I'm looking at the TTF markers. So this is the Dutch Trading Hub, which is the European equivalent of Henry Hub in the U.S. So the front month price there is now about $15 per million BTUs, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But it's roughly 5x what it is at
Yeah.
Henry Hub in the U.S. Although I'm seeing actually Henry Hub prices have jumped quite a lot just in the last few days. What is it? Front month is almost $3.50. It's been at $3 for a long time.
Yes.
So you followed.
That's why you've had to buy me dinner.
Well, we can, as long as you're good with fish and chips, we can make that happen. I can afford that here in London.
Yeah, but 5-to-1 has been a pretty good ratio, standard to look
Differential
at.
between Henry
And that's another reason that we're attracted to Europe, because there's going to be a period of high prices, and frankly,
so
Robert,
you get more. So if you can make it happen, and you're saying this is obviously you have some altruism in your business, but only some. But you got to make money, right? And so if you're able to bring new gas online in Europe, your profits are going to be higher. Now you have a lot more risk here, right? Because of the regulatory issues we've been talking about. Is that your biggest risk here? Is it the regulations when you look at this? Is it technology? Is it geology? Is it workforce? When you look at, you put a lot of money into this, and you spend a lot of time flying back and forth from Dallas to Europe, put a lot of your own sweat and blood and tears, and romance of the airplane has been lost on me, right? I don't travel transatlantic as much as you do, but you really dedicated yourself to this. But is that your life's mission? Why are you so dedicated to this? You could work a little. You've been at this a long time. You could take it a little bit easier, but this is a big challenge. No.
Is that another way of looking at me and saying you're no spring chicken?
Well, I'm being subtle here, Yates. I mean, didn't I thought I was being really clever in how I posed this to you.
Let me answer.
But I think it is an essential question. But so yeah, why now? And what are the biggest risks you're facing? Right.
Why now is because of the opportunity. Because
Okay.
we can buy reserves today, conventional reserves that we can develop, and we can buy them at a very reasonable price, based on what the financial markets are doing, what the stock market is doing to punish those that are motivated to sell. So we've been able to capitalize on that, and I'm very pleased with it. And Robert, don't worry about it. We're going to be fine, even if regulations are not changed to develop the big resources. But Europe is not going to be fine if they don't change it. And is it a mission? Yeah. This is something that we can do that will make more difference to the prosperity of more people than anything that I can imagine doing in a lifetime.
Well, so is that? I guess I'll ask the question this. So, what motivates you then? And I'm not. I'm stating the obvious here. I'm no spring chicken either, George. All right. I'm 63. I get up in the mornings. My brother Wally says it sounds like I'm making popcorn. And everything. But you could take it easier. But you've done well in your career. But Why are you working so hard at this? What is the motivation?
Because I think it needs to be done, and we're in a position to do it. Of course, there are financial incentives for us
Sure.
to get these projects, the big projects, the unconventional projects, over the finish line. But also, I see dynamics in the world that would encourage this to be done. And so you see, what's the common theme of Western countries today? Massive deficits.
Huge.
And then inflation.
Right.
So-called unconventional or renewables have exposed themselves and are not economic, and they're demanding more of governments, more subsidies, and sometimes you run out of other people's money. This is going to be
to quote the
Maggie Thatcher,
Margaret Thatcher.
yes,
Right.
and this is going to be difficult. The invasion of Ukraine woke Europe up on energy supply issues.
Right.
I don't think some of the leadership in Europe is reacting exactly the right way. Some
Right.
of them say, well, we're
They
not
should
doing
be.
enough.
They should be reacting with greater urgency.
They should be reacting with greater urgency, but the national security issue is right there on the table, and there is a political effect. Most people, Robert, don't pay much attention to political issues
Right.
until it means something to them.
Right.
Energy means something to them.
Yeah.
You saw what happened in by-elections in the UK a month or so ago.
Right. And in Germany, in Bavaria,
Bavaria,
and Hesse, and the Yellow Vest movement, and the Dutch farmers, and this is. I think does seem to be a change in sentiment that is happening.
Yeah.
And I found some notes we talked to. Now it's a little more than a year ago. You said that in Spain there's something like 200 trillion cubic feet of natural gas in place, and then you talked about the. I found the numbers on the you called it beautiful rock in the UK. What was it? 650 BCF per square mile. That was it.
Yep.
Right.
640, I think, was the report.
Yeah. So that was the Weatherford. That's the type of shale.
No, that was a service company.
Oh, Weatherford. Weatherford.
The,
okay, right. That they had an estimate of 640 BCF per square mile, and you said that's almost double the best place in the United States. So, so this could be just enormously. I mean, the shale gas boom in the U.S. fundamentally changed the U.S. I mean,
Yes.
fundamentally changed the geopolitics of oil and gas.
Yeah.
We went from, in a span of a decade, from being an enormous prospective LNG importer to now the biggest exporter of LNG in the world. We're now exporting crude for the first time in forever, right? Mm-hmm. We're in a much different place than we were in 1973. So, what is it going to? You think I get this question a lot. So, what's it going to take? What's it going to take for people to sober up and see just how bad things are? Why aren't when are they going to wake up to the stupidity here? So, answer that for me. What is it going to take for Europe to get their get their shit together?
Well, a continuation of today's trends is what I would say.
That the political winds of the voters, the voters are, I'll just note, so Rishi Sunak, this is just a few weeks ago, and I'm sure you saw this, right? As soon as he backtracked on net zero and said we're going to be pragmatic and realistic, right? This is a month or two ago. The poll numbers for the Tories went up 4 points in the next week. Yeah. I mean, so they're looking at this. Macron is looking at this. They're looking around and saying, "Hey, we might not be in power if we don't change our tune here." So you think it's that the voters and the sentiment of voters is finally being recognized?
Oh yes, and realize the European Union goes through some elections next year, which could be very, very important. We've got a winter coming on, higher prices always focus attention.
Focus the mind.
And interest. I don't listen. I don't want to attack other forms of energy. I'm for every form of energy that works.
Right.
But some forms of energy are not working very well.
Yeah.
And that is being exposed to the public and
Right.
and to the voter. So those are some trends that will tend to concentrate the attention
Right.
of policymakers, and we haven't given up on anybody.
Right.
We'll talk to anybody, and more and more doors, more and more people are very interested in finding a solution.
And so you think Sunak, Rishi Sunak, of course, the current prime minister, so you think he could be persuaded that the Tories could come to their senses and then realize, no, we better get fracking and get fracking right quick?
Well, I'm no insider,
Right.
with the current government, certainly. But how far a step is it to go from saying we've got to have oil and gas, we're approving these new licenses in the North Sea
Right.
for development? How big a step is it to say, and by the way, we have huge resources onshore that need to be developed as well, or just lift the ban and put the regulatory apparatus in Plan B,
Right.
to be able to accommodate those things that need to be done.
Okay,
That's not a
so
very
let's assume
big
Sunak
step.
says that tomorrow, or does that tomorrow. I assume he has to get it through Parliament, right? And then how soon, if that happened tomorrow, that you got the approval, they repeal the ban, how soon could you have gas flowing?
Well, the problem, Robert, is we have another election. You almost have to have labor supporting that
To get
that
them-
move to get capital actually allocated to it. So I'm afraid
I see. So the capital's not going to be in place until you get regulatory certainty.
You've got to have some regulatory certainty.
Yeah.
So these
Okay.
these guys really have to do their job,
Right.
Robert.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be too much.
I'm
to
not.
ask.
I'm not holding my breath, George.
Well,
I-
and I'm not holding my breath.
yeah.
So what we will do and continue to do is recognize the merit of what we're trying to do and the benefits of what we're trying to do, and when politicians and policy makers run out of the other alternatives, here we are. Here we are. And that may be the best we can do, Robert.
Right.
I see a lot of enthusiasm from some
Right.
to really do better.
I think attitudes are changing. So, but let me just a couple more questions because we're right about an hour, and been very fun chatting with you and getting your views on all these things, and obviously seeing why you've stayed at this for so long. But it's imperative, I think, people understand that Britain has done this before. There's a book called The Secret of Sherwood Forest. Tell us about what happened. Tell me. 1943, a bunch of Okies came to Britain. Tell me that story briefly.
Well, the Okies, noble drilling.
Right, and I'm from Oklahoma, and Okies is not really Oklahomans. Okies is kind of a derogatory term, right? But
Well,
that's what its origins are. But
so, to help support the Allies in World War II, noble drilling brought over drilling rigs and roughnecks to the UK
from Ardmore, Oklahoma.
From Ardmore, Oklahoma. And is something that's a very proud part of their history.
Yeah.
This is the company that went on to discover the offshore fields in the Mediterranean.
Offshore
near
Israel that are now
Israel.
now owned by Chevron.
Now owned by Chevron, but energy independent by and large.
Right. That Tamar and Leviathan fields, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Tamar is now
Exactly.
shut down because of the war.
Because of the war. So the Roughnecks developed oil. This is a period of time where there was an oil embargo
Right.
on the UK. A very important lifeline. There's
Oil was in very short supplies, and
Very
among the
short
Allies,
supply.
the Big Inch and Little Big Inch would just be being built about that time, right? In
Yeah,
1943. Yeah.
Yeah.
These were the pipelines built from Texas and Oklahoma to carry oil and was just oil, or was oil and refined products, wasn't it, to the East Coast for the war effort?
I think that was crude oil. We
Okay,
may have
it was crude,
exported
okay.
refined
Okay.
products as well. But
Right,
The
okay.
saying
Which was
from
key-
World
which
War
was-
II is we
which was-
floated to victory on the
So,
sea of
so,
oil.
but the punchline for that is that they drilled over 100 wells in a span of a year. It went from zero production to 3,000 barrels per
Right.
day. I mean, it was
Yeah.
a significant, at that time, significant contribution to the war effort.
Yeah.
And it was
Absolutely.
done in a remarkably short amount of time, which I think is to me is just part of the template for what could happen in Britain if they just would get off the dime and realize. I think I would call it the peril that they face.
I think that peril is going to be more and more apparent. You're reading about it more and more in the newspapers.
Yeah.
People are beginning to really focus. What do we do now? Is there an answer? And there is an answer.
Yeah.
And the great news about it is it's also a very clean answer.
Yeah.
It's not. We're not violating. We're
Clean, domestic, and cheap. What's wrong with
clean, domestic, and cheap. Exactly.
So, last two questions, George. I ask these of all my guests. What are you reading? What books are on your top of your book pile these days?
Well, right now I'm about halfway through with the AI book that was written by Kissinger and Schmidt on artificial intelligence.
What's it called? Do you remember?
No, I actually don't. You can look up the
Okay,
authors.
all right, yeah. Eric Schmidt and Henry Kissinger?
And Henry Kissinger
Oh, really?
collaborated on writing a book on artificial
Kissinger's like
intelligence.
154 years old, isn't he? How's he doing? Yeah, well, okay, yeah.
And I also recently read Kissinger's books on leadership.
Oh, really?
Which is an interesting book. I would recommend.
Okay.
I'm an eclectic leader, generally nonfiction.
I don't read much.
histories.
I don't read much fiction either. I don't.
Yeah. Well,
Occasionally, a man in Moscow. That's when I read. It's a novel.
A Gentleman
in
Moscow.
Thank
One
you.
of my favorite books.
It's amazing. Just an
Just
amazing.
one of my favorite
My
novels
son Michael
ever.
told me you have to read this book,
Yeah,
Dad, and
just
he almost tied me down and
fabulous.
said and I need to read more Tolls, but that's his name, isn't it? Amor Tolls. Yeah, but
Have you read A Nightingale?
A Nightingale?
Nightingale.
No.
The Nightingale. Fabulous.
Same
book.
author?
I put it in the same category as A Gentleman from Moscow.
okay.
But this was about the war effort and smuggling American flyers who had been shot down in France, smuggling them over the Pyrenees.
And this is a fiction book or nonfiction?
It is based on nonfiction, but it is a novel.
It's a novel. Okay.
It's a novel, but
Gotcha.
it's in the same category as A
Great.
Gentleman from Moscow.
Okay. What gives you hope, George?
What gives me hope is the human spirit and creativity we see all around us. We don't have any problems we can't solve. We always go through. It seems like we have to fall into a ditch once in a while to just for the challenge of crawling out of it. And we feel like we're in a ditch now, and we probably are. But look at what we have going for us in the United States and in the Western world.
Yeah.
All we have to do is a few smart things, and I know some of those smart things can get complicated. But in a time of crisis or a time of real challenge, that's what we do. That's always what we do.
Yeah. Good. I've neglected to mention you can look up George. I should have get HeycoEnergy.com. Heyco, Heyco Energy.com. George, it's been a pleasure. We talked about having you on the podcast for a long time. We finally made it happen. I'm pleased we did.
I'm delighted, Bob. Always great to be with you.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Thanks to all of you out there in podcast land, and to my new friends David and Vashi, who are behind the camera here in London, making all this podcast magic happen. So thanks for tuning into this episode of the Power Hungry Podcast. Until next time, see ya.